I was reading through some feminist texts in Latin America, and there was a woman in Brazil who was she predicted everything that we're talking about back in like the 80s or something. Like, and we know from like other women around the world who also predicted how this the language of fluidity and performativity and how gender was being co-opted. They predicted how this was going to work against women, right? But you read those texts and it's like my heart goes out to the woman in Brazil is called Raquel Rosario. She was a Brazilian academic who did a lot of work on this. But she was kind of alone, you know. It's like I read her text from back then and I'm amazed that in 20 years ago, 30 years ago, she was able to analyze what we are witnessing right now. But it breaks my heart that she was saying that, and she was by herself, you know, essentially by herself. And maybe when she went to other feminists and said, like, you know what, we need to be very careful when we talk about like gender equality, when we talk about how we want to, you know, the mainstreaming of gender that can turn against women. Maybe she was mocked, maybe she was laughed at, maybe she was ignored, maybe she was, you know, ostracized from her feminist communities. And now we see that she was actually right all along. But I think that the only thing that gives me hope in all of this, that now we're not alone, you know, this whole project of gender identity policies and gender neutral bathrooms and making sports to be according with gender identity, that only worked as long as there is no feminist pushback, you know. And I'm so grateful that I was born in a time in which I'm not alone. There's women in India who are fighting against this. There's women in Namibia who are fighting this. This is an international response. I would have felt so despondent if I was in the position that Juliet was 30, 40 years ago, you know. So I think that the only thing that we can do is just amplify our opposition, you know, because the true beauty of gender identity policies in England, in India, in the Dominican Republic, everywhere in the global South, is that they are done without the knowledge of the population. You know, I wonder how many people in your street, in the street that you live, I wonder how many of them know the implications of these policies. You know, certainly the people in the street that I live in the Dominican Republic, they had no idea what's going on. You know, so there's like this can only work as long as people don't know, as long as no one writes about this in any national newspaper, as long as there's no podcasts or videos, there's just a blanket silence around these policies. And the only thing that we could do is talk about it, you know. And I think like you've talked with me about how vilified you have been in some sectors of Indian feminism, you know, but then that's how you realize that your message is reaching people, you know. Number one, your haters are reaching you, or your haters are like watching the videos that you produce, watching your documentaries. But that also means that there's a whole lot of people who are also watching you. If you were insignificant, no one would care about you. You know, if your message was insignificant, then there would be no pressure to sort of silence Vaishnavi. There would be no desire to try to shut down Vaishnavi, to get her off the magazines or the newspapers where she used to write. You know, if you were irrelevant, no one would care what you write or what you say. But the fact that you have experienced so much pushback and all you're doing is describing what is already happening to women and challenging and questioning that. The fact that you've received so much pushback, it just means that this only works as long as there's this climate of intimidation and silence. And you cannot do that forever. You could do that for a while, but you can't do that forever.
Whenever there is any communication that I have with young Indian gender critical feminists who are anti-porn, pornography, and are questioning about this whole gender identity ideology, especially those who sort of dipped into it and then just merely dodged it and escaped it and are now really grateful that they found, you know, that there is a community within India, even though it is really, really small right now, are really grateful that there is a community where they can feel normal and not somehow like an alien or something. And that's exactly what I tell them too, that the only thing that we can do right now, the only thing is keep talking about it, because when there is pushback is when we are getting heard. And when there is pushback is when you can show that there is pushback in the first place. There are situations that are happening in India, like you said, it happens in stealth. It is true because Stonewall has infiltrated in India, is now looking at global South countries and are now tying up with corporations that are investing shitloads of money into their projects and are conducting what is called as inclusive workplaces. Okay, and they're focusing on corporations because that's where the money is, and there really is no need for such a project, because if it is sexual orientation that you're trying to represent, you're not going to disclose that during your interview. It doesn't matter who you're sleeping with, it is private affair. So this whole endeavor of Stonewall trying to do these projects is only to help trans identifying men who can stand out from the crowd, or effeminate men who stand out from the crowd so they don't get discriminated against and they get forcefully affirmed because of projects like this. Nobody knew that Stonewall is infiltrating in India. Sex trafficking bill that was proposed. Now Mama Cash is collaborating with local activists over here and they're pushing back against it because they think that sex workers might be misunderstood as being trafficked. Therefore, that bill should not get passed. Now, I don't have to tell you, in countries like ours, a bill is as useless as is a law, because even if it is a legal thing, there are so many ways in which you can work around it. You can get away with it. Now, they're not even allowing us to pass a toothless law because they believe that sex work will get damaged. And who's doing all this conversation? Perhaps the pimps. Perhaps the people that are bringing in more people to do sex work, So I'm trying to say that these things go hidden, and these are all the ways in which they try and capture the market. They try and capture the minds of really young people who believe BDSM is empowering her in her workplace. I mean, who has ever heard of a connection like that? As I'm talking to you, I realize that you are more optimistic than I am. You are more positive about it than I am, but I'm just terrified. I'm terrified of this.
I've been terrified for a long, long time, so I feel like I just sort of like run out of terror. I just ran out of terror. No, I think it's not that I'm sort of like cheerful about the future, because I understand the dangers. I'm very awake to the dangers of gender identity policies and the effects that it would have in, for example, my country, the Dominican Republic. But, when I started, this is so bizarre. I feel like I live different lives, like one in Spanish and one in English. But like people in Spanish and in Spanish-speaking countries, they don't really know me from like the legal case or anything. They know me because as a gender, I'm sorry, but they know me as a gender theorist, because back in like 2018 in January or something, I started writing in general about feminism years before, but back in early 2018, I started doing these long form articles, like 3,000 words, 4,000 words article, just explaining the theory behind all of these gender identity policies, right? And when I started, I felt so alone. When I started, it was cricket, and I remember that I sent my first article to this feminist platform and I thought that they would like censor me. They would never publish me again. It was going to be like this whole thing. And then when I sent it, like they were like, oh, we're so grateful that one of you decided to start talking about this. Like they were just so excited that at least one of all of the women who were writing for them decided to just take this on. So it's like, so yes, all of these Spanish-speaking people, like they know me for that work that I did, right? And back then it was just, there wasn't a live conversation as there is right now, because now there's women coming up every day. There's a new woman who's writing an article, there's a new organization, there's a new this, there's a new this. There's sort of like that frenzy or that element of excitement that I mentioned at the beginning, like now that's happening to us. Now it's sort of like, you know what, I too want to have my say. I too want to say something and do something and activate and all that kind of stuff. And I think that I spent years in which I felt like I was doing, I felt like I put this backpack on. And I wrote about this also for my Dominican newspaper. I put this backpack on and said, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to write about this. And I don't care if I lose all my friends. I don't care if I don't care what I lose. I couldn't give less of a fuck. I don't care. I'm going to do it. And I did it. And now it's like the whole thing has flipped, you know? And if before I was worried, like, well, I'm doing this on my own and no one's listening to me. Now I'm feeling like the complete opposite, in which it's like, no, there's a whole lot of people that want to listen to me. Like I have an event and I'm going to be speaking with a Dominican woman, and it's for the Women's Declaration in Mexico. And there's all these people who are like, oh, we want to listen to Raquel. And it's like, when is it? What time is it? Where's the link? And they just keep like sort of hyping it up on like social media. And I just look at Twitter and I'm like, everyone, just calm down. I'm just going to be talking. Like I feel I'm an introvert. I need to remind people this all the time. Like, listen, I'm an introvert. I can't deal with this kind of stuff. But they're just like so excited to, and I'm not saying it because of myself, or I'm saying it in the sense of if before I was worried that no one was listening to the analysis that I was making, and if I was concerned that it wasn't reaching anybody, and I was concerned that there was no one on the other side, now a few years after that, I can see that there's a lot of people on the other side. And even, it doesn't matter the number, but it's like there's people who are excited to have this conversation. You know, and the people who watch your videos and the people who watch that video and all the women who invited me to that conversation, like there's this element of like a hunger for discussion and a hunger for debate. And that's the antidote to the imposition of gender identity policies, because it only works if you can do it by stealth, if you can do it with no scrutiny, if you can do it under secrecy. But if I, for example, if you and I do this video and we talk with, let's say 5 people, those 5 people are not going to go home and be like, oh, well, that was interesting, the end. No, they're going to like look for more information and research what is it that Mama Cash is doing, and they're going to look at the toilet issue, and they're going to be looking at that company that doesn't have a sexual harassment policies. You know, it multiplies, which is literally like the most that we can do, because you and I don't have any money. You know, you and I don't have any political influence. You and I have no wealthy connections. All we have is, you know, is a feminist analysis that we can make among ourselves and distribute to other people. But that's kind of proving to be the thing that it's helping us fight back against this, you know. I was reading, for example, about Argentina. And in Argentina in 2012, they passed the first gender identity bill. And it is just batshit, you know. It talks about how essentially self-ID for everyone, including children, you know, and they can do it even if the parents don't agree. That was 2012. And I wonder how many feminists were even aware of the implications of that, or were organizing against the implications of that, right? That was 2012, you know, over 10 years ago. Then in 2018, they passed a legislation that said that you had to erase, it was explicit, you have to erase the word sex from any public policy, you know, to be in accordance with the gender identity bill, you know. So it's like, it's a long political project to just erase sex from public life, right? Which is the metric that you use to be aware of the inequality affecting women, right? So there's this law project, and this law which passed in 2018 that says that you have to erase sex from every public document or government document, right? And it's like, still, there wasn't a lot of pushback back then, you know, but now you have a pushback in Argentina, and now women are aware of it, and now you have feminist campaigns that are organizing and that are writing and that are advocating against it, you know. And it's like, and that's kind of like a worst case scenario. Argentina is kind of like the worst case scenario, because it's like the damage has already been done, and now they're trying to scale it back. But you know what? It's like, at least it's happening. At least it's happening now. It could have just never happened, you know? It's like, even if it's like they're in the worst case scenario in which like they pass a gender identity law, they pass a law saying that you have to erase sex from public policy. And now, finally, feminists on the ground are waking up to the problems. It's like, well, but at least they're awake now, you know? That's the best that they can do now. And there's a long history of countries in Latin America, specifically like Argentina or Chile, in which they have been used as experiments for neoliberalism, you know? Countries in the global north come up with this like insane policy experiments, and they want to see like, well, what could happen? You know, they've done this with economic reforms, you know, well, let's try this out in like these little countries in Latin America and see what happens. Well, they've done the same thing with gender identity policies as well, in which you use global South people who you know are more likely to be in poverty, who you know have less structural protections, who you know are more vulnerable to any of these policies. They use them as experiments. And that's what happened to Argentina, which is grim from a feminist point of view, but it's like, you know what, at least now there's a response. Honestly speaking, I'm gonna ask you like a personal question, but Navi, if you weren't doing this right now, like what would you be doing?
I don't know.
You just wouldn't do anything else, you know? It's like, it's one of those things in which like, once you realize the damage that is being done for women's rights, for children, for sports, in medicine, in all of these other areas, you know, once you realize what's happening, this is not the kind of topic that you can just go like, oh, okay, well, that was interesting, I'm gonna go to a party now. It's like, you want to do something about it. So no, I don't think I would be doing anything other than just keep talking and keep speaking about it.
Yeah, me too.